Let me start with something that sounds like a conspiracy theory you hear from a guy wearing a tinfoil hat in a Denny's parking lot. But this is actually a matter of public record. In the early 1980s, some of the most beloved, iconic, and culturally significant cartoons on American television were legally classified as advertisements. I don't mean that they were spiritually ads, and I don't mean that they were sellouts. I mean that according to federal broadcasting standards, that they were indistinguishable from the commercials that aired during the breaks. And then one rule changed. Just one. After that rule vanished, cartoons stopped being made to last and started being made to sell. This shift didn't happen because creators suddenly lost their talent. And it didn't happen because children suddenly demanded less narrative complexity and more plastic accessories. It happened because the system learned what it rewarded. And the terrifying thing about systems, whether it's the stock market, an AI algorithm, or a network executive trying to buy a third boat, once a system learns what works, it never unlearns it. We say cartoons changed because culture changed. We tell ourselves that attention spans dropped because of smartphones, which, to be fair, is not completely wrong. And we say that streaming ruined the communal experience of Saturday morning cartoons. But that's not where it starts. If you want to understand why your favorite show got canceled after one season, or why every movie is a reboot of a toy commercial, you have to look further back. This story starts when cartoons stopped being treated as a public responsibility and started being treated as a raw market opportunity. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand why the Transformers weren't an artistic choice, why the 1990s felt like a glorious fever dream of creativity, and why modern streaming services cancel shows with the ruthlessness of a Spartan throwing a weak infant off of a cliff. Let's get into it. To understand how we broke it, we have to understand how it used to work. For most of television history, children's programming was fenced off from the rest of the broadcast world. It wasn't treated like Dallas or the nightly news. This wasn't because lawmakers were just killjoys who hated fun, and it wasn't because the government wanted to control the minds of the youth. Though historically, governments do love doing that. It was because early regulators understood a fundamental psychological truth. Children are not tiny adults. Adults understand persuasion. When an adult sees a car commercial featuring Matthew McConaughey driving a Lincoln while murmuring about the fabric of time, the adult knows, okay, that man is an actor, he was paid to be there, and Lincoln wants my money. We have a defense mechanism. We have cynicism. If Spider-Man tells a 5-year-old that eating a specific brand of cereal will make them strong, that 5-year-old is going to eat that cereal until their teeth vibrate. Now, early regulators, specifically at the Federal Communications Commission, or in other words, the FCC,
you'll never win by messing with the fellas at the freaking FCC,
understood this distinct vulnerability long before we had buzzwords like media literacy or parasocial relationships. They recognized that you couldn't just unleash capitalism on a toddler without some ground rules. So they created a hard boundary between programming and promotion. Could you advertise toys? Yes. Could you make cartoons? Yes. Could you make a cartoon that was essentially a 22-minute advertisement for the toy that you were selling on the commercial break? Absolutely not. This was known as a separation of content and commerce. It created friction. It forced businesses to move slowly. It forced broadcasters to air educational content, even if it was boring, even if it didn't sell anything, because holding a broadcast license was viewed as a privilege that came with public service obligations. Friction is annoying for businesses, but friction slows exploitation. It acts as an ethical speed bump. When you remove friction, systems don't become nicer or more creative, they become more efficient. And in the story of American animation, efficiency is the villain. Now, before we turn regulators into saints and networks into demons, let's discuss nuance. The regulatory environment of the 1960s and 70s was complicated, to say the least. It was less of a utopia and more of a bottleneck. By the late 1970s, the media landscape was shifting beneath everyone's feet. The era of the big three networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, having a stranglehold on American eyeballs was coming to an end. Cable was emerging, and with that, broadcasters argued with some validity that the regulations were outdated. Number one, they were slow. Getting approval for new types of shows was bureaucratic hell. Number two, they favored the giants. NBC had lawyers to navigate the red tape. A small local station just didn't. And number three, the parental argument. Broadcasters argued that the government shouldn't be the nanny. Parents should decide what their kids watch. If a parent wants to let their kid watch garbage, isn't it their God-given American right? Deregulation was pitched as the ultimate freedom. It promised growth, competition, and a diversity of voices. Let the market decide was the rallying cry. If people want educational content, they'll watch it, and the networks will make it. If they want action adventure, they'll get that too. And to be fair, deregulation did deliver expansion. Cable exploded, we got Nickelodeon, MTV, and CNN. The ecosystem became larger, faster, and louder. But here's the part nobody likes to say out loud during a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new free market. Control moved from the government, which has a mandate to protect citizens, theoretically, to corporations, which have a mandate to generate profit. And children's television became the most profitable testing ground imaginable. Now, this is where the story stops being abstract and starts wearing a suit and tie. The dismantling of children's TV didn't happen by accident. It happened under a specific administration guided by a specific worldview.
Welcome, folks, to
the Reagan administration. Now, Ronald Reagan didn't wake up one morning in 1981, slam his fist on the Resolute desk and say, "I want G.I. Joe to sell more plastic tanks." Reagan probably didn't care about cartoons at all, but he cared deeply about an economic philosophy that viewed government regulation as a disease. Reagan appointed a man named Mark Fowler as chairman of the FCC. And if you're looking for the antagonist of this story, Mark Fowler is a strong candidate, but he wasn't a mustache-twirling villain. He was a true believer. He fundamentally believed that television was not a sacred public trust. He famously said that television is just another appliance. It's a toaster with pictures, he argued. So let's pause and really look at that metaphor, because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. If television is just a toaster, it doesn't shape cultural values. It doesn't require moral oversight. It doesn't need to protect vulnerable audiences. A toaster doesn't need to ensure that your bread is educational. It just needs to toast. If TV is a toaster, the only metric that matters is, does it sell? This single belief quietly dismantled decades of broadcast philosophy. Under the previous model, the airways belonged to the public. Under Fowler's model, the airways were just real estate, and you don't tell a landlord he can't build a billboard on his own lawn. Under Fowler's FCC, the changes were swift but often quiet. They didn't hold a press conference announcing, "We are now allowing corporations to brainwash your children." They just stopped enforcing the rules that prevented it. The requirement for educational programming, it was watered down. The limits on advertising minutes per hour, it was completely deleted. The result was an immediate extinction event for a specific type of show. Educational, slow-paced programming that relied on network goodwill began to vanish. Captain Kangaroo, gone. Schoolhouse Rock, canceled. They had no back end, no toys, no merchandise, no franchising potential. You couldn't sell a Captain Kangaroo action vehicle, and Schoolhouse Rock didn't have a playset. Though, admittedly, a Conjunction Junction train set would have been fucking fire. In this new toaster era of television, a show that only got high ratings was actually failing. High ratings just meant you had eyeballs. The real goal was to take those eyeballs and direct them towards the nearest toy aisle at your local Walmart. But the final nail in the coffin was the removal of the ban on program-length commercials. Previously, if you made a show called The Adventures of Supercar, you could not run commercials for the Supercar toy during that show. That was considered deceptive. Deregulation removed that wall. Suddenly, toy companies and animation studios looked at each other across the boardroom table and had a collective epiphany. They asked a question so simple it didn't sound dangerous. Why are we selling millions of dollars buying 30-second ad spots when the show itself can be the ad? The purpose of a cartoon stopped being storytelling. The purpose became imprinting. The show existed to create a problem. Cobra is attacking. That could only be solved by a purchase. G.I. Joe needs a new hovercraft. But to really make this work, the industry needed a blueprint. They needed proof that kids would actually buy into a universe that deeply. They needed divorce. We have to talk about Star Wars. George Lucas is a genius, but not just for filmmaking. He is the grandfather of modern merchandising. Before Star Wars, movie merchandising was just an afterthought, but Lucas retained the merchandising rights for Star Wars in exchange for a lower directing fee, a deal that is widely considered the smartest financial move in the history of Hollywood. The films made millions, the toys made billions. Toy companies watched this happen and realized something profound. Stories create emotional debt. When a child watches Luke Skywalker, they don't just want to watch him, they want to be him. And since they can't actually go to space, the closest thing they can get to that feeling is holding the Luke Skywalker action figure. The toy is a physical totem of the emotion felt during the movie. When deregulation hit TV in the 80s, this Star Wars logic was applied to Saturday mornings, but they stripped out the make a cinematic masterpiece part and skipped straight to the make the toys part. This birthed the syndication model. Companies like Mattel or Hasbro wouldn't just pitch a show to a network, they would create the show, fund it themselves, and give it to local TV stations for free or extremely cheap in exchange for the advertising time during the broadcast. It was a perfect loop. The station gets free content, the toy company got a 22-minute commercial, and the kid got a headache from begging their parents for a castle grade school. Let's look at He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. If you revisit He-Man today, it is a deeply weird show. It features a bodybuilder in fur underwear, a skeleton man who is inexplicably ripped, and a green tiger. He-Man did not exist because a writer had a burning desire to tell a story about the duality of man and the burden of power. He-Man existed because Mattel had lost out on the Star Wars toy license and was desperate to make a generic barbarian toy line to compete. They made the toys first, and the show was reverse engineered to explain the accessories. This created a specific type of storytelling that dominated the 1980s. This storytelling focused on static characters that did not evolve or change, because that would make the version 1 action figure obsolete way too quickly or confuse a kid who just bought it. The storytelling also focused on the team dynamic. You never had just one hero, you had a team of heroes. And why? Because selling 5 figures is better than selling 1. And last but not least, every hero needed a vehicle. Vehicles had a higher profit margin than just figures. This is why Transformers killed off Optimus Prime in a 1986 movie. It wasn't a bold narrative choice to teach kids about grief. It was because the 1986 toy line had a new leader, and they needed to clear the shelf space. So they basically traumatized the entire generation of children for inventory management. And the ultimate lesson that the industry learned was essentially, art is risky, systems are safe. If the systems were so efficient, why do people look back at the 1990s as some sort of golden age of animation? Why did we get Rugrats, Hey Arnold, Ren and Stimpy, Batman the Animated Series, and Dexter's Laboratory? These shows weren't toy commercials. Ren and Stimpy was barely suitable for human consumption, let alone a vehicle for selling plushies. The 1990s emerged from a lag in the system rather than a moment of stability. Cable networks needed round-the-clock programming and lacked the catalog to support it. The toy-driven model had exhausted its appeal, and parents were increasingly skeptical, and the market was saturated with low-quality imitations. Industry leaders faced genuine uncertainty about what would follow. When systems are confused and desperate for volume, they loosen the leash. They let creatives take risks because they have no better ideas. Nickelodeon let creators make creator-driven shows. They basically said, make something funny. We need something to fill the 4 p.m. slot. This allowed genuine art to sneak through the cracks. Batman the Animated Series was allowed to be dark and moody because the executives were just happy to have a Batman show, and Rugrats was allowed to be ugly and weird because it was cheap to produce. This was a temporary glitch in the system. By the late 90s and the early 2000s, the system recalibrated. Pokemon arrived and perfected the collect them all mechanic. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 allowed for massive media consolidation. The weirdness was sanded down and the lag spike was over. And that brings us to today. People often say streaming killed the old model. when it didn't. Streaming is just a toaster model upgraded to a smart appliance. The logic that started with Reagan's deregulation has reached its final form. In the 80s, the currency was toy sales. In the 2020s, the currency is data and retention. When Netflix or Disney Plus cancels a beloved animated show after one season, it feels irrational to the viewer. But everyone loved it. We stream on Twitter or X or whatever the fuck it's called nowadays. But the algorithm doesn't care about love. It cares about efficiency. The streaming model has inherited the 80s mindset. Content is not art. Content is a utility to drive a transaction. Back then, the show exists to make you buy a toy. But now, the show exists to keep you from canceling your subscription for one more month. If a show doesn't hook an audience instantly, the data says it's inefficient. It gets cut. There's no room for a show to grow or to find its footing or to be a slow burn. Just like there's no room for a He-Man toy that didn't sell. We have replaced the program length commercials with subscription retention content. The terminology changed. The corruption of the art form remained the same. So no, the government didn't destroy cartoons by banning fun. They didn't march into the studios and burn the animation cells. They did something much more efficient. They changed the incentives. Ronald Reagan and Mark Fowler didn't hate animation. They just removed the guardrails that forced corporations to pretend they cared about anything other than profit. They turned the playground into a marketplace. Once a system learns that it can extract value from childhood, whether through plastic swords in 1985 or engagement algorithms in 2026, it never unlearns it. Cartoons weren't ruined by bad writing or woke culture or short attention spans. They were reshaped by a regulatory decision to treat a child's imagination as a natural resource to be mined. We are still watching the smoke from that fire. The only difference is now we pay a monthly subscription fee to inhale it. So the next time you watch an old episode of Transformers and feel that warm glow of nostalgia, just remember, you aren't watching a show. You're watching the most successful marketing campaign in human history. But hey, at least the theme song was a banger.
More than meets the eye of Transformers.
Sitting here waiting on you. Waiting.